Welcome to another episode of the Functioning Law podcast. Today we're discussing a document that forms the very bedrock of legal practice in England and Wales, the Solicitors Regulation Authority's Code of Conduct for Solicitors. I am Theo, and I am joined by Anna, my wonderful co-host.
Hi Theo, very happy to join you and our audience today.
You are welcome, Anna. The SRA code isn't just a list of regulations, it's the professional DNA of every solicitor. It outlines the standards of professionalism and ethical practice expected from every individual authorized by the SRA. Whether you're deep in preparation for the Solicitor's Qualifying Examination, the SQE, or you're a practicing solicitor seeking to refresh your understanding of your core duties, this episode will guide you through each critical element of the code.
I'm really glad we're tackling this. The SRA code is everywhere in my SQE revision notes. It feels like this huge, dense set of rules that you have to know perfectly. Honestly, it's a bit overwhelming. Is it just about avoiding punishment, or is there a bigger picture we need to grasp for the exam and for practice?
That's an excellent question, and it gets right to the heart of the matter. It's not just about punishment, it's about professionalism. The code is built upon the 7 SRA principles, which are the fundamental tenets of ethical behavior, like acting with independence, honesty, integrity, and in the best interests of your client. The Code of Conduct then provides the practical framework for how to apply these principles in your day-to-day work. It applies to all of us, no matter our role, from a junior trainee to a senior partner, and in every type of organization, be it a huge city firm, a high street practice, or working in-house.
You mentioned it applies to individuals. Does that mean my conduct outside the office could come under scrutiny if I have a heated argument on social media, for example?
Exactly. The code's reach extends beyond the traditional 9 to 5. It covers conduct related to your legal practice even when you are outside the workplace, but only if that behavior has a demonstrable relevance to your professional life. A private disagreement is one thing, but if your conduct on social media, for instance, was abusive, discriminatory, or demonstrated a lack of integrity, it could absolutely damage the public's trust in you as a solicitor and the profession as a whole. This is a crucial aspect of SRA Principle 2, acting in a way that upholds public trust and confidence in the profession.
Okay, so at the heart of it all is this concept of trust. It's the foundation.
Precisely. Trust is the currency of the legal profession. Everything else is built upon it. Paragraph 1 of the code is dedicated to maintaining that trust and acting fairly. Solicitors are expected to treat clients, colleagues, and all those they come into contact with through their work with respect and fairness. This explicitly means you must not engage in unfair discrimination, harassment, or victimization. This links directly to your duties under the Equality Act 2010.
So my personal views or unconscious biases can't be allowed to creep into my professional judgment? For example, if I found myself making assumptions about a client based on their background.
You're exactly right to identify that. You must consciously prevent personal views from clouding your professional relationships or the quality of service you provide. This duty also means you must never, ever abuse your position of trust. A classic example of abusing one's position would be a solicitor handling a vulnerable client's finances who pressures them into making a will that benefits the solicitor. That is a flagrant breach of trust. On a more day-to-day level, when you make a commitment to a client, the court, or another solicitor, you are expected to fulfill it. You must adhere to agreed timelines or, if there aren't any, within a reasonable period.
So no ghosting clients or leaving opposing counsel hanging for weeks without a response?
Precisely. That kind of delay can damage trust and is unprofessional. And of course, any form of misleading behavior is strictly prohibited. This isn't just about telling outright lies. It can be misleading through omission. For example, deliberately failing to mention a crucial piece of information to a client because you think it might upset them. You must be honest and transparent.
I imagine that standard of behavior applies equally to how we treat colleagues inside our own firms.
Absolutely. Paragraph 1.2 is very clear. You must not bully, harass, or unfairly discriminate against anyone. This is about fostering a safe and respectful workplace culture. In fact, if you are a manager, you have a specific and positive obligation to challenge behavior that does not meet this standard. You cannot turn a blind eye. A toxic work environment not only harms individuals, but also undermines the integrity and trust in the entire firm, which again is a breach of the SRA principles.
It's clear that ethics starts at home, within the firm itself. What about when we're in a dispute heading towards court?
This is where your overriding duty to the court comes into sharp focus, a direct application of SRA Principle 1, to uphold the rule of law and the proper administration of justice. Paragraph 2 of the Code is dedicated to dispute resolution and proceedings. Your primary duty is not to mislead the court or allow it to be misled. This means you must handle evidence with the utmost care, ensuring it is never tampered with, suppressed, or distorted. Generating false evidence or trying to improperly influence a witness to change their testimony are among the most serious professional misconduct offenses a solicitor can commit.
So, no shady courtroom tricks learned from television dramas. Does this mean I can't even suggest what a witness should say?
There is a fine but critical line. You can and should prepare your witness. This involves reviewing their witness statement, explaining the court process, and what to expect during cross-examination. This is known as witness familiarization. However, you must not engage in witness coaching, which is telling them what to say or encouraging them to invent or alter their evidence. That would be a deliberate attempt to mislead the court.
And what if I find a legal case or a statute that actually harms my client's position? Am I obligated to tell the judge about it?
Yes, you are. Paragraph 2.6 is explicit. Your duty to the court to act with honesty and integrity includes an obligation to draw the court's attention to relevant cases and statutory provisions or procedural irregularities, even if they are unhelpful to your client's case. Your duty to the administration of justice under Principle 1 can, and in this instance does, outweigh your duty to your client under Principle 7. You cannot simply hope the other side or the judge doesn't spot it.
That's a really important distinction to remember for the SQE. Let's move on to the actual delivery of legal services. What are the key rules there?
Paragraph 3 of the Code centers on service and competence, which ties directly to Principle 7, acting in the best interests of each client. The starting point is that you must only act on instructions that are clearly provided by the client themselves or by someone properly authorized to instruct you on their behalf. If you have any doubt, for example, if a client seems vulnerable or you suspect they are being pressured by a family member, you have a duty to take steps to satisfy yourself that the instructions reflect the client's own wishes before you proceed.
So it's not okay to just guess what the client wants or take a relative's word for it.
Never. And the service you provide must be competent. Competence isn't just about knowing the law, it includes having the necessary skills, such as good communication and case management, and keeping your knowledge up to date. This is why continuing professional development, or CPD, is a mandatory, ongoing obligation. Those in managerial roles have an additional duty under paragraph 3.5 to effectively supervise their teams and ensure everyone they manage is competent and understands their ethical duties.
So CPD is a career-long commitment, not just a box-ticking exercise. That makes sense. Now, what about an area that I know the SRA takes incredibly seriously? Client money.
Yes. The management of client money and assets is governed by very strict rules detailed in the SRA accounts rules and reinforced by paragraph 4 of the Code. Mishandling client money is one of the quickest routes to being struck off the roll. The core duty is to safeguard any money and assets entrusted to you. You must account transparently for any financial benefits you receive as a result of a client's instructions. For instance,
interest earned on money held in a client account, unless the client has specifically agreed otherwise in writing.
So absolutely no dipping into the client account for office expenses, even for an hour?
Absolutely not. That would be a serious breach. You must keep client money entirely separate from the firm's money. Paragraph 4.2 states that you must not personally hold client money unless in very specific and permitted circumstances. The reason for these stringent rules is once again all about trust. The public needs to have absolute confidence that their funds are safe in the hands of a solicitor.
Okay, total separation and safeguarding. What about when we refer clients to other businesses like a financial advisor or a surveyor?
This is covered in paragraph 5, and the key principle here is transparency. Clients have a right to know if you have any interest in the business you are referring them to. You must inform them of any financial interest, such as a commission or referral fee, or any other interest such as a family or business relationship with the owner of that company. Any fee-sharing arrangements must be documented in writing and must be compliant with the law and the code. The client must not be charged more than they would have been otherwise, simply because of the referral arrangement.
So if there's any kind of deal happening in the background, the client must be fully aware of it and consent. That seems fair. This brings us to a huge topic for the SQE, conflicts of interest and confidentiality.
Indeed, this is a cornerstone of ethical practice, covered in paragraph 6 of the Code. Avoiding conflicts of interest is fundamental. The rule is simple. You do not act if there is a conflict or a significant risk of one. There are two main types. The first is an own interest conflict, where your own interests clash with your client's. For example, you cannot act for a client who is buying a house from your spouse. The conflict is clear and unavoidable.
And the second type is a client conflict, where you have two clients whose interests clash.
Exactly. For instance, acting for both the buyer and seller in a property transaction is generally prohibited because their interests are fundamentally opposed. Now, there are some very narrow exceptions detailed in paragraph 6.2. You may be able to act if the clients have a substantially common interest or are competing for the same objective, but the conditions are extremely strict. You must have a reasonable belief you can act in both clients' best interests, they must give informed consent in writing, and you must put effective safeguards in place to protect confidential information. These exceptions are complex and must be approached with extreme caution.
And on that point, what about confidentiality itself?
Confidentiality, under paragraph 6.3, is your duty to keep the affairs of your clients confidential unless disclosure is required or permitted by law or the client consents. This duty is absolute and lifelong. It continues even after the retainer has ended and even after the client has passed away. You also have a corresponding duty of disclosure under paragraph 6.4, which is to make the client aware of all information material to their matter.
So basically, I can't spill client secrets ever. But what if those two duties, confidentiality to one client and disclosure to another, clash?
An excellent and critical question. This is the classic confidentiality-disclosure conflict. Imagine your firm previously acted for client A, who told you his land was contaminated. Now client B comes to you, wanting to buy that same piece of land. You have a duty of confidentiality to client A not to reveal the contamination. But you have a duty of disclosure to client B to tell them about it. These duties are in direct conflict. In this scenario, the duty of confidentiality to the former client, client A, prevails. You cannot act for client B. You must decline the instructions.
That's crystal clear. If confidentiality and disclosure clash, confidentiality wins and you can't act. Now, what about when things go wrong? How does accountability work?
Accountability is an integral part of legal practice covered by paragraph 7. You are responsible for your work and must be able to justify your decisions and actions. This means you must cooperate fully with the SRA and other oversight bodies like the legal ombudsman, providing accurate information promptly when requested. Hiding from the regulator is a breach in itself.
So, if I make a mistake, I can't just ignore it and hope it goes away.
Exactly. In fact, you have a professional duty to report any serious breach of the regulatory arrangements by yourself or your firm to the SRA as soon as reasonably practicable. You also have a duty to report serious breaches by other solicitors or firms. If you make a mistake that has caused harm or has the potential to cause harm, you must inform the client, explain the situation, and take remedial action. Apologizing to a client is a key part of this and is not, for regulatory purposes, treated as an admission of legal liability.
That leads nicely into the final area, providing services to the public and being transparent.
Yes, this is detailed in paragraph 8. When providing services to the public, you must ensure you have an effective complaints handling process in place. Clients must be informed, both at the start of a matter and in writing at the end of your complaints process, about their right to escalate a complaint to the legal ombudsman and the relevant time limits for doing so.
And what about transparency on fees? No hidden costs lurking in the small print?
Absolutely. Paragraph 8.7 requires you to give clients the best possible information about how their matter will be priced. For certain areas of law, like conveyancing and probate, the SRA transparency rules require firms to publish price and service information on their website. The goal is to ensure clients can make informed decisions. All of your publicity must be accurate and not misleading. You must be clear about which of your services are regulated by the SRA and which are not, so clients understand the protections available to them.
So it all comes back to clarity, honesty, and trust.
Precisely. And remember, the SRA Code of Conduct is not a static document. It evolves as law and society change. As a solicitor, you have a professional obligation to stay informed about updates to ensure you remain compliant with the latest standards.
This has been incredibly helpful. You've taken this daunting document and broken it down into its core principles and practical applications. It feels much more manageable now. And for everyone listening, don't forget to subscribe to Dr. Yanis's MCQ SQE newsletter for more exam tips and updates.
Thank you. And do check out the YouTube channel for more videos that explain complex topics just like this one. We've taken a comprehensive look at the SRA Code of Conduct today, and I hope you can see how it represents a profound commitment to public trust and professional integrity. For those of you preparing for the SQE, understanding these standards is vital, not just for passing the exam, but for building a successful and fulfilling legal career founded on ethics. And if you found this episode helpful, please press the like button so we can continue to grow this community of future solicitors.
Good luck with your studies, everyone. Remember, ethical practice is the foundation of a trusted legal profession. Therefore, stop trying to purchase illegally obtained MCQs and prep school documents on social media. A solicitor must always act with integrity.
See you next time.
Dr. Yanis, SQE Prep.